Hey everyone, welcome to Hands On Books. If this is your first time visiting the channel, this is just a show where we open books, mostly used from a pile that I have been contributing to over the last half year or so. If this is something you end up enjoying, feel free to like, subscribe, all that good stuff, and let's get started. First up, so this is Auguste Racinet's full-color picture source book of historic ornament. All 120 plates from Ornament Polychrome, Series 2. And I got the idea to get this book. I already knew what this one was before we opened it, but I got the idea to order this book from the one we reviewed last time about Gustave Moreau, and apparently this is one of the books mentioned there or one of the sources mentioned in that book that Moreau used to get ideas for people's clothing and costume design. And so let's just read the back here. This beautiful book, the second in a 2-volume series, completes the first publication in paperback of a classic reference work on the decorative ornament of the major cultures of the world. Here, reprinted in large format and in full color from the original, are all 120 plates of Auguste Racinet's long-prized L'Ornament Polychrome, Series 2. The plates contain over 1,500 copyright-free decorative motifs embodying the finest, most characteristic achievements of a great cavalcade of artists and artisans, from the jewelry makers of ancient Egypt to the tapestry weavers of 18th century France. In these fascinating pages are designs that once graced the fabled worlds of the ancient Greeks and Romans and historic China and Japan. Here, too, are decorative motifs found in the arts and crafts of India and Persia, Byzantium and Russia, as well as those of the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, and Europe of the 16th through 19th centuries. Adapted from jewelry, illuminated manuscripts, weapons, tiles, carved wood panels, ceilings, textiles, inlay, hardware, ceramics, stained glass, and more, the design and design elements have been harmoniously combined into 120 brilliant collages, each reflecting the achievement of an individual culture. No more beautiful and compact presentation of historic design has ever been made. Available for the first time at an easily affordable price, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so yeah, this seems like a very cool source book, as it says. Let's check a few pages out, and we'll keep moving because this isn't really a book to be read, but I thought might as well open it on the show because some people might find it interesting. So here we have the sort of palmiform Egyptian columns. This is really cool. It's exactly what I was hoping it would be. And Moreau used books like this to get ideas into his settings, because he used a bunch of temples in the backgrounds and things like that. And he drew from, he liked to draw from Eastern cultures like Persian influenced and Mughal and Japanese influence. This kind of looks like Japanese. Oh, China. Okay. So let me see if there's one thing in the table of contents that jumps out at me, and maybe I'll jump to that. Let's find something from Persia. 27 to 33. Very cool. Yeah, I don't really have a lot to say about this, but it just seems like a good thing to have. If you want details for something, like sort of background details or of setting pieces, be a good thing to scroll through and come up with something. Yeah, so like architecture ideas, jewelry ideas, general patterns. Very cool. Okay, let's go ahead and get on to a new book. All right, next. Probably not. Semitic Magic, Its Origins and Development by Reginald Campbell Thompson. Nothing on the back. So this is I guess like a print-on-demand copy of Campbell's book from 1908, which I don't even remember. I don't think I ever knew that it was this old. And it's got it's like literally just a copy from the old book. So it's got the old font and everything, which I would prefer to what they put in the new print-on-demand book. So that's actually good. All right, let's read a little bit of the preface. The theories put forward and maintained in this book are based on a study of that intricate demonology which has gradually developed throughout the lands of Western Asia. The earliest written records of this magic are found in the cuneiform incantation tablets from Assyria, and, aided by the various stepping stones forward by rabbinic tradition, Syriac monkish writings, and Arabic tales, we can trace its growth and decadence through 3,000 years down to its survival in modern Oriental superstition. Furthermore, the parallels afforded by Aryan and Hamitic nations show how close the grooves are in which savage ideas run, and that the principles of magic are, broadly speaking, coincident in each separate nation, and yet, as far as we know, of independent invention. All these superstitions combine to throw light on many of the peculiar customs of the Old Testament, and help to explain the hidden reason why these customs existed. From a study of the characteristics of the evil spirits, which the Semite believed to exist everywhere, certain deductions can be made which bear intimately on our knowledge of the origins of certain taboos and the principle of atonement. These may be briefly stated thus. 1. All evil spirits could inflict bodily hurt on man. 2. The relations between spirits and human beings were so close that both semi-divine and semi-demoniac offspring could be born of intermarriage between them, either of human mothers or fathers. 3. From this belief in intermarriage with spirits arose the taboos on certain sexual functions. These, according to the present theory, indicate the advent, proximity, or presence of marriageable demons who would tolerate no meddling in their amours. Hence the tribesmen, fearing their jealousy, segregated the contaminated person from the rest of the tribe for such time as he deemed expedient. 4. It frequently happened that, in spite of the care taken to isolate all persons or things taboo, a man might break an unwitting taboo, and as a result would fall sick from the attack of a resentful spirit. The priest was then called in to exorcise the demon, which he was able to do by a transference of the demoniac influence from the body of his patient into some other object. 5. This is the base of the atonement principle. The priest first of all inveigled or drove out the demon from the sick man into a wax figure or slaughtered kid, and he was then able to destroy it. As civilization proceeded, the most probable theory is that the original idea of the slaughtered kid became merged in that of the ordinary sacrifice, representing a common meal with the god. The carcass of the kid then played the part of a sin offering, in the sense in which it is now understood, instead of being a receptacle for the demon cozened forth from the patient. 6. Having proceeded thus far, the principle of substitution for the firstborn demands attention. This apparently takes its origin in primitive cannibal feasts, the horror of which was softened as the Semites advanced in progress. With their migration perhaps to a more fertile land where stress of poverty and famine did not demand such extremities as cannibalism, and also from a contemporaneous rise in civilization, it became natural to substitute a beast for a tribesman at the tribal sacrificial feasts. The study of taboo from the Assyrian side has been comparatively neglected, and yet the evidence hitherto gleaned from the cuneiform writings shows that it existed in practically the same forms in Mesopotamia as in other countries. I had hoped to find more proof of its presence in certain cuneiform tablets dealing with medical and kindred subjects in the British Museum, but my 2 applications for permission to copy unpublished tablets of this nature were refused by the museum authorities. Hence the material at hand for a study of a most interesting branch of comparative religion is more imperfect than I could have wished, and the relative scientific value of what we actually know on this subject is proportionate to the amount of evidence which may be afforded at some later date by these privy documents. I'm going to skip the rest of the preface, but yeah, whenever you pick up one of these books and it's from 1908, you never know how correct any of it is going to be, because it's from 1908, and a lot of the scholarship has been largely superseded, maybe. But I'm sort of down this rabbit hole of how demons were thought of and represented in ancient cultures for something I'm writing on, so I don't really care if any of this is accurate. I'm just trying to get cool ideas. Let's read a little bit of the introduction here. Magic and sorcery, though they lay outside of religion and were forbidden arts in all the civilized states of antiquity, were yet never regarded as mere imposture. The difficulty lies in distinguishing magic from religion, and we can best quote the broad definition laid down by Robertson Smith, that the difference between religion and magic is that, while the former is the worship for the good of the community, magic is the supernatural relation for the individual. We have, therefore, to examine much more than the mere spell of an Arab sheikh for a lovesick Bedawi, or the amulet of some Syrian wise woman against the evil eye. The principles which underlie such wizardry go deep into the roots of religion itself, and for this reason, if for no other, magic and witchcraft deserve to be considered as something more than the impotent trickery of charlatans. As religious principles developed themselves among primitive savages, men began to learn something of the mysterious natural forces which would enable one tribal wizard to pit himself in ghostly combat against the warlock of another clan and defeat him by his superior magic. When Elijah, priest of Yahweh, challenged the priests of Baal to a test of comparison between his God and theirs, he is at once doing what medicine men of different savage tribes always do. And in this intertribal warfare of witch doctors, we can see how different classes arose among those who wrought in spiritual matters. First, the priest who was the head of the profession, and after him a successive line of magic workers in grades of decreasing power, until we arrive at the bottom rung of the ladder. The witch whose business it is to cast spells, or make love philters or diet drinks of herbs for a miserable price. Then, when the existence of this lower order of sorcerers is fully established and accredited, to whom the credulous or malicious poor will resort for aid and subterfuge, it behooves the priestly caste to set about defeating the machinations of such foes to law and order. For these lesser magicians, being able to invoke the powers of darkness, cause much of the tribute debit to the priests to find its way by illegal channels into their own pockets, and it is such upstart rivals who impoverish the temple. From this arise so many of the decrees against sorcerers who have dared to set themselves in opposition to the established caste. The men of old never mistrusted the power of the sorcerer merely because he was of low degree. To them he was quite as capable of laying a spell as the priest was of removing it. Hence we find that, although mere conjuring is today reckoned the lowest depths to which magic can descend, one of the most blatant tricks possible is described in the Assyrian legend of the creation itself. The gods assembled themselves to praise Marduk in chorus. Quote, "Then they set in their midst a garment, And unto Marduk their firstborn they spake, May thy fate, O Lord, be supreme among the gods to destroy or create. Speak thou the word, and thy command shall be fulfilled. Command now, and let the garment vanish, and speak the word again, and let the garment reappear. Then he spake with his mouth, and the garment vanished. Again he commanded it, and the garment reappeared. In no wise more advanced is the story of the rod becoming a serpent in Exodus 4, and Mohammedan tradition relates that Abraham himself was able to work similar magic. That when he cut the bird in pieces in his sacrifice, an eagle or dove, as others say, a peacock, a raven, and a cock, he retained only their heads whole, and mixed the flesh and feathers, laying them in 4 parts on 4 mountains. Then, when he called to each by name, they rejoined themselves in their first shapes to their heads. Still more puerile are the trivial performances of conjurers related in later Jewish literature. Rabbi Ashi says that he saw a man scatter strips of silk from his nose, and Rabbi Hia is told the story of a rider of a camel who cut off the head of the camel with his sword, and thereafter rang a bell, and the camel stood up. Rabbi Hia answers, Did you see, after it stood up, that the place was dirty from blood and dust? There was nothing. Hence it was only a dazzling of the eyes. These tricks, hypnotic or otherwise, represent the least effective side of magic, and have little bearing on the more serious uses to which it was put. Sorcerers in olden days were far more concerned with the utilitarian side of their craft than in working sterile wonders merely to please a crowd of sightseers. Theirs was the graver duty of freeing mankind from taboos of uncleanness, of casting out demons from possessed folk, or relieving them from some spell laid upon them by a malignant witch. Theirs also was the power to ward off all hostile ghosts, to lay troublesome spirits under a ban that they might not torment such mortals as lay within their reach. The priesthood in which such powers were vested formed a large class, particularly in the systematized methods of Babylonia, and their functions were manifold, allotted severally to different divisions of the caste, each with a descriptive name. Instead of reading more from that introduction, I'm just going to read from this section that I skipped to because I think it'll be interesting. We now come to the 3rd class of spirits, those that are half human and half supernatural. From the standpoint of their peculiar existence, they must be accounted the most interesting of the 3 species, for it is not merely from the interest attaching to their nature that they are valuable, but the beliefs in their origin throw such light on primitive ideas as cannot be reckoned too highly. The evidence that they were a very popular form of phantom is so well attested and convincing as to form a firm base for certain theories on taboo that I hope to bring forward. Going back again for the 3rd time to the Assyrian incantations, as the earliest systematized beliefs, we must first of all discuss an interesting triad of ghostly visitants, the Lilu, Lilitu, and Ardat Lili. The second is obviously the feminine counterpart of the first, but it is difficult to discriminate accurately between the characteristics of the Lilitu and Ardat Lili. Both the latter are, however, female demons, the femininity of the Ardat Lili being especially emphasized by the word Ardatu, which always has reference to the woman of marriageable age. This Ardat Lili seems to have had much closer relations with human beings than the Lilitu, and she takes over the functions of the Lilith of the Hebrews, which is obviously the etymological equivalent of Lilitu. These functions are no more nor less than that she becomes the ghostly wife of men, probably unmarried ones if there is anything in the comparative folklore of the Arabs, by reason of her desire which forces her to roam abroad until she find a mate. It is from this that we may find a derivation of the words Lilu and Lilitu. They are certainly not connected with the Hebrew Layla, night, as they either come from a Semitic root or from a Sumerian word. If it be the former, there is no difficulty in referring them at once to the words Lalu, to be abundant, and Lulu, lasciviousness, wantonness. That the rabbits should have compared That the rabbis should have compared night with Lilith was very natural, but in view of the Assyrian or Sumerian origin of the word, this is now untenable. Let us now examine the evidence for the nature of this triad. In a list of phantoms, we find the following mention made of two demons. Quote, the Ardat Lili that hath no husband, the Idlu Lili that hath no wife. The latter is merely the male counterpart of the first, occurring only here as far as I know, with stress laid on its masculinity, Idlu being the word for a grown man of full strength. We have, therefore, 4 phantoms of this nature to discuss. The Lilu, the Lilitu, and the Ardat Lili, with a rare counterpart, the Idlu Lili. Leaving the last named alone for the present, the Ardat Lili, the true equivalent of the Lilith, is the best known, and the Assyrian incantations are quite clear in their descriptions of her character. First, then, we find from the text quoted that she has no husband. This is amplified by the prayer to the sun on behalf of a possessed man. Quote, he on whom an evil spirit hath rushed, he whom an evil demon hath enveloped in his bed, he whom an evil ghost hath cast down in the night, he whom a great devil hath smitten, he whose limbs an evil god hath racked, he the hair of whose body an evil fiend hath set on end, he whom a hag demon hath seized, he whom a ghoul hath cast down, he whom a robber sprite hath afflicted. I like that, robber sprite. He whom the Ardat Lili hath looked upon, the man with whom the Ardat Lili hath had union. Because robber sprite feels like a evil fairy or something. So that is an ancient Assyrian incantation. Interesting. Read a little bit more of this and I'll move on. The Lilu and Lilitu must have had something of the same character, although we know very little about them. The question then arises as to the Idlu Lili, that is, as far as I know, and some Greek that I'm not going to try to pronounce. I was inclined to think at first that the Idlu Lili was nothing more than an academic invention of the scribes, parallel to the Ardat Lili, inasmuch as this text in which it occurs is merely a grammatical composition made up of phrases occurring in cuneiform grimoires. But when it is remembered, first, that women in Semitic religion are liable to conceive through supernatural means, and that, secondly, these Assyrian incantations, as we have them, are written only from the male standpoint, doubtlessly verbally altered in exorcising sickness in women, there are the strongest possible grounds for the existence of a male counterpart of the Ardat Lili in the phantasmagoria of the Babylonians. At any rate, it is absolutely certain that whether we consider the fellow of the Ardat Lili to have been called Lilu or Idlu Lili, the fact remains that women, as much as men, were exposed to the possibility of marriage with jinn and other invisible powers. In late Hebrew tradition, Layla is prince of conception. That jinn can intermarry with human beings is a well-attested belief of the Arabs. Such folk are always solitary and unmarried. Jalaluddin explains that the advantage which men received from jinn was their raising and satisfying their lust and their appetites. The clan of Abur bin Yarbu was descended from a Silat, or she-demon, who became the wife of their human father. Palgrave cites it also. Sayce quotes as an instance that, about 15 years ago there was a man in Cairo who was unmarried, but had an invisible jinnah as wife. One day, however, he saw a woman and loved her, and 2 days later he died. It should be added that in Egypt, where early marriages are the rule, bachelors who have reached the prime of life are believed to be married to Afarit or jinn. Another case, mentioned by Baldensperger, was that of an epileptic servant who maintained that a female jinni was in love with him and used to strike him half dead to the ground. At Mosul, there was the same tradition, and I met with it while discussing jinn and kindred subjects on the Mound of Nineveh one evening. That's awesome, to be able to ever do that. When incidentally and entirely spontaneously, one of the men, Yaqub, told me that he knew a man in Mosul who declared that he was visited at nights by a spirit in the form of a beautiful woman, who had already borne him 3 children, and he was so pleased with this menage that he scorned a conventional marriage. Rabbinic literature is full of the doings of Lilith, who bore to Adam devils, spirits, and Lilin, the Assyrian Lilu. Whoever slept alone in a room was likely to be beset by her. The rabbis believed, too, that a man might have children by allying himself with a demon, and although they might not be visible to human beings, yet when that man was dying, they would hover round his bed to hail him as their father. At the funeral of a bachelor, the Jews of Kurdistan cast sand before the coffin to blind the eyes of the unbegotten children of the deceased. Similarly, the Assyrian demon Alu owes its parentage to a human being. Bar Shalman, the legendary son-in-law of Asmodeus, the demon, after marrying his daughter, a princess, becomes the father of a son by her, but deserts her. The princess then pretends to renounce him, but begs a final kiss, which kills him. Another demon of the same kind, named Ornias, is described as saying, in the Testament of Solomon, "Those who are consumed with desire for noble virgins upon earth, these I strangle. But in case there is no disposition to sleep, I am changed into 3 forms. Whenever men come to be enamored of women, I metamorphose myself into a comely female, and I take hold of the men in their sleep and play with them." Fascinating. All right, let's keep moving. Thank you. We got 2 in here, so after this package, I think we'll be done. All right. Volume 2 of the Arabian Nights. Kind of beat up, but I don't know, can't remember how much I paid for it. A new translation by Malcolm C. Lyons. Let's read the back. A little quote here from the Arabian Nights. "They found a man standing with a girl seated beside him, and with him there was a horse made of ebony." When the beautiful Shahrazad gives herself to the bloody-handed King Shahryar, she is not expected to survive beyond dawn, but using all her wit and guile, she begins a sequence of stories that will last 1,001 nights, stories of jinns and blind men, warriors and princesses, viziers and magical palaces, and wonderful talking birds. This volume also includes the well-known tales of Sinbad the Sailor. Along with this landmark new translation, Robert Irwin's introduction examines the history and provenance of the Nights, the different uses of the works, from ethnographic source to storytelling celebration, and the varied translations through the years. This edition also contains a glossary and maps. Awesome. And kind of along the lines of the last one, I ordered this hoping that there would be some jinn stories in it, but kind of annoys me not to have volume 1 before I get volume 2, so I'm going to have to order that. Read a little bit of the introduction, and then I'll may flip at random to one of the stories and see how it starts out. The medieval Arabic story collection of Alf Layla wa Layla, or the 1001 Nights, is best known in English as the Arabian Nights. It is reasonable to ask how old this classic work of Oriental fiction is, who wrote or compiled it, and how many stories it contains. But such questions are almost impossible to answer. The collection was put together in a haphazard, unpoliced fashion over many centuries. In the opening story, which frames all the other stories in the Nights, the monarch Shahryar, who has been sexually betrayed by his wife, cuts off her head, and thereafter he takes a different virgin to bed every night and has her killed in the morning. In order to break the bloody cycle, Shahrazad, daughter of the king's vizier, volunteers to give herself to Shahryar, but in order to avert her execution, she starts to tell a story to her sister, Dunyazad, whom she has brought with her into Shahryar's bedroom. Shahrazad leaves her story unfinished at the break of dawn, and Shahryar spares her life in order to hear the rest. And so things proceed, with Shahrazad finishing one tale only to start a new one, This goes on night after night until, after 1,001 nights, Shahryar repents of his decision to have her killed. The frame story of a clever bride telling stories to a jealous king in order to prolong her life goes back to a lost Sanskrit original dating from no later than the 8th century. At some point, stories from this Indian story collection were translated into Pahlavi Persian. The 10th century Arab polymath al-Masudi refers to the Persian version, which was called Hazar Afsaneh, 1,000 stories. We do not know what was in this story collection. Although the Sasanian Persian seems to have had an extensive literature of entertainment, no examples have survived in their original Persian form. However, it seems likely that the stories of the Hazar Afsaneh were mostly didactic fables, often adapted from Indian originals, as was the case with the famous collection of animal stories known as the Fables of Bidpai. Such stories of the mirrors for princes kind gave guidance on good government and right conduct. The early Persian prototype of the Arabian Nights was probably a bit boring, and the wilder tales of marvels, monsters, and mutilations were likely to have been the later inventions of Arab storytellers. Cool. Let's skip to a story. So this is Nights 295 to 719 covered in this second volume. So maybe there's 3 volumes. Let's just read the lead-in and Night 295. Shahrazad continued. A story is also told that one night, when the Caliph Harun al-Rashid was feeling restless, he summoned his vizier, Jafar the Barmecide. When he came, the Caliph said, "Jafar, I am very restive tonight and in a bad humor. I want you to fetch me something to cheer and relax me." "Commander of the Faithful," said Jafar, "I have a friend, Ali al-Ajami, who has a fund of entertaining stories that raise the spirits and remove sorrow from the heart." "Bring him to me," said the Caliph, to which Jafar replied, "To hear is to obey." He left the Caliph's presence to look for Ali, and sent a messenger to fetch him. When Ali had come, Jafar told him of the Caliph's summons. "To hear is to obey," Ali replied. Night 295. Morning now dawned, and Shahrazad broke off from what she had been allowed to say. Then, when it was the 295th night, she continued. The two of them set off for the palace, and when Ali appeared before the Caliph, he was given permission to sit, which he did. The Caliph told him of his depression and went on. "I have heard that you know many stories and tales, and so I want you to tell me something that may dispel my cares and cheer me." "Shall I tell you of something that I have seen with my own eyes, Commander of the Faithful?" Ali asked, "or something that I have heard?" "If you have seen something, then tell me about it," Harun replied, and Ali agreed. He began. "You must know, Commander of the Faithful, that one year I traveled from Baghdad, my home, accompanied by a servant who brought with him a small bag. I came to a certain city, and while I was there, buying and selling, I was assaulted by a Kurdish ruffian, who seized the bag. 'This is mine,' he claimed, 'and all its contents are my property.' 'Muslims,' I called out, 'save me from this worst of rascals. The bystanders told us to go to the Qadi and to abide by his arbitration. I was happy to do this, and we set off to the Qadi. When we got there, he asked why we had come, telling us to explain the case. I said, 'We have come to you as litigants with opposing claims and are content to accept your arbitration.' 'Which of you is the claimant?' the Qadi asked. At that time the Kurd went forward and said, 'Master, this bag and its contents are mine. I lost it and then found it in the possession of this man.' 'When did you lose it?' the Qadi asked. 'Yesterday,' replied the Kurd, 'and I spent a sleepless night because of its loss.' 'As you have recognized it, describe what is in it,' the Qadi told him. The Kurd said, 'In it there are 2 silver coal sticks, together with coal for my eyes, a hand towel in which I placed 2 gilt cups and 2 candlesticks.'" Coal is like ancient eyeliner, I think. There are 2 tents, 2 plates, 2 spoons, a pillow, 2 leather mats, 2 jugs, a china dish, 2 basins, a cooking pot, 2 clay jars, a ladle, a pack needle, 2 provision bags, a cat, 2 bitches, 1 large bowl, and 2 large sacks, a gown, 2 furs, a cow with 2 calves, 1 goat, 2 sheep, a ewe with 2 lambs, 2 green pavilions, 1 male and 2 female camels, a buffalo, 2 bulls, a lioness and 2 lions, a she-bear, 2 foxes, a mattress, 2 couches, a palace, 2 halls, a colonnade, 2 chairs, a kitchen with 2 doors, and a group of Kurds who will bear witness to the fact that this is my bag. What have you to say? The Cadi asked me. I had been flabbergasted by what the Kurd had said, and so I went forward and said, May God honor our master the Cadi. There was nothing in my bag except for 1 little ruined house and another one with no door. A dog kennel and a boys' school, with boys playing dice. It had tents and their ropes, the cities of Basra and Baghdad, the palace of Shaddad ibn Ad, a blacksmith's forge, a fishing net, sticks, tent pegs, girls, boys, and 1,000 pimps who will testify that the bag is mine. When the Kurd heard what I had to say, he wept and sobbed. My master the Cadi, he said, this bag of mine is well known and its contents have been described. In it are fortresses and castles, cranes, beasts of prey, chess players and chessboards. There is a mare and 2 foals, a stallion and 2 horses, together with 2 long spears. It also has a lion, 2 hares, a city and 2 villages, a prostitute with 2 villainous pimps, a hermaphrodite, 2 good-for-nothings, 1 blind man and 2 who can see, a lame man and 2 who are paralyzed, a priest, 2 deacons, a patriarch and 2 monks, a Cadi and 2 notaries, and these will bear witness that this is my bag. What have you to say, Ali? Said the Cadi, and, bursting with rage, I came forward and said, May God aid our master the Cadi. And then it just continues on in 296. I mean, you definitely get the feeling that the princess is trying to sort of ramble on and make this last, like make her lists as long as possible. But it does seem like clever and funny and playful. See, look, there's more lists of things in the bag. I don't know if I want to read this right now, but I'm just going to flip it random to another page and see what we got. Night 514. Morning now dawned, and Shahrazad broke off what she had been allowed to say. Then, when it was the 514th night, she continued, I have heard, O fortunate king, that Janshah told the 2 Mamluks to take the news to his father, adding, and then fetch tents, as we are going to stay resting here for 7 days until a ceremonial procession comes to fetch us, so that we may enter in great state. The 2 Mamluks mounted and went off to Janshah's father, calling out to him, Good news, king of the age! What is the news? Asked King Tigmus when he heard them. Has my son Janshah come back? Yes, they told him. He is back from his travels and is nearby in the Qurani meadow. The king was so delighted by what they said that he fell to the ground in a faint. When he had recovered, he told his vizier to give each of the Mamluks a splendid robe of honor and a quantity of money. To hear is to obey, said the vizier, who then immediately got up and gave them these gifts, saying, Take the money in exchange for your good news, whether it is true or false. We are no liars, they told him, and only just now we were sitting with him, greeting him and kissing his hands. He told us to fetch tents as he was going to stay in the Qurani meadow for 7 days until the viziers, emirs, and state officials go out to meet him. The king then asked them how he was, and they said, He has a lady with him who looks like the Huri of paradise. On hearing this, the king ordered the drums to be beaten and the trumpets to sound in order to spread the good news, and he sent messengers to all parts of the city to relay it to Janshah's mother, as well as to the wives of the viziers, emirs, and state officials. These messengers scattered throughout the city, telling the people that Janshah had returned. King Tigmus then formed up his guard and his troops and set out for the Qurani meadow. Janshah was sitting with the lady Shamsa by his side when he saw them advancing. He got to his feet and walked up to them, and when they saw him and recognized who he was, they dismounted and approached him on foot, greeting him and kissing his hands. Janshah walked on with the troops in single file in front of him until he came to his father, who, on seeing his son, threw himself down from the back of his horse and embraced him, shedding floods of tears. He then mounted, as did Janshah, and rode off with the troops on either side. When they reached the riverbank, the men dismounted and set up tents and pavilions, hoisting flags, beating drums both large and small, and sounding pipes and trumpets. On the king's orders, the servants brought a tent of red silk, which they set up for the lady Shamsa. For her part, she got up, and after removing her feather dress, she walked to the tent and sat down. When she was seated, King Tigmus, with his son Janshah at his side, walked towards her, and at the sight of the king she got to her feet and kissed the ground before him. He sat down with his son Janshah on his right and her on his left. After having welcomed her, he asked Janshah to tell him what had happened to him while he had been away, at which Janshah told him the story of his experiences from beginning to end, filling his father with astonishment. Turning to Shamsa, the king said, "Praise be to God, by whose aid you have done me the greatest of favors by reuniting me with my son." Cool stuff. I'm going to have to do some more research on how to figure out how the larger storylines are split up between the nights, because, obviously the princess's stories will be going into multiple nights, and it's going to see if there's like an easy table of contents somewhere, because I didn't really see one in here. It just starts, it just goes from page 1 to 857, so it's not very helpful. Oh, Index of Nights and Stories. That would have been good. 873. Here we go. Okay, cool. So volume 1, volume 2. Okay, so there's only 2 volumes in this Penguin set. Anyway, all right, I'm going to keep going. All right. Got A Cavern of Black Ice by J.V. Jones, Sword of Shadows, Book 1. And I just saw some people talking online about this book, like super impressed by it. And sometimes when I see a comment section of people dumping praise on a book I've never heard about, I'll end up checking it out. So that's what I'm doing. Best-selling author of The Baker's Boy, J.V. Jones, has emerged as one of the most acclaimed new fantasy authors in a decade. Set in the stark beauty, cruel peril, and incredible magic of the known lands, A Cavern of Black Ice is the first book of a stunning new trilogy that turns to the distant north, where fortress cities and Arctic wasteland are the refuge of mysterious ancient beings. Awakening the Reach. In Spire Vanus, an uncrowned ruler steals magic from tortured captives, while an innocent girl is haunted by nightmares of ice. On the frigid steppes, 2 brothers find their kinsmen slain by swords that draw no blood. At a remote homestead, a hardened warrior leaves his family to follow a raven's summons. And in a deadly wilderness where nature and the gods have no mercy, 2 young fugitives will confront the unfolding of an apocalyptic prophecy. Let's check it out. I've never heard of J.V. Jones before, and I have not done very much research on this book. Let's just see how it starts. Nice fantasy map, always a good plus. And prologue. A birth, a death, and a binding. Teresa whispered a hope out loud before looking up at the sky. Please make it lighter than before. Please. As her lips came together, she looked up past the wind-twisted pines and the ridge of frost-riven granite, up toward the position of the sun. Only the sun wasn't there. Storm heads rolled across the sky, cutting out the sunlight, massing, churning, driven by winds that snapped and circled like pack wolves around sheep. Teresa made a small gesture with her hand. The storm wasn't passing overhead. It had come to the mountain to stay. Dropping her gaze, she took a steadying breath. She couldn't afford to panic. The city lay 1,000 feet below her, rising from the shadow of the mountain like a second, lesser peak. She could see the ring towers clearly now. 4 of them, 2 built hard against the wall, the tallest piercing the storm with its iron stake. It was a long way down. Hours of walk, even, and she had to be careful. Resting her hand on her swollen stomach, she forced herself to smile. Storms? They were nothing. She moved quickly. Loose scree, bird skeletons, and snags of wind-blasted wood tripped her feet. It was hard to walk, even harder to keep her balance on the ever-sharpening slope. Steep draws and creases forced her sideways instead of down. The temperature was falling, and for the first time all day Teresa noticed her breath came out white. Her left glove had been gone for days, lost somewhere on the far side of the mountain, and she stripped off her right glove, turned it inside out, and pulled it over her left hand. The fingers there had started to grow numb. Dead trees blocked her path. Some of their trunks were so smooth they looked polished. As she reached out to steady herself against one of the hard black limbs, she felt a sharp pain in her lower abdomen. Something shifted. Wetness spilled down her thighs. A soft sting sounded in her lower back, and a wave of sickness washed up her gullet, depositing the taste of sour milk in her mouth. Teresa closed her eyes. This time she kept her hopes to herself. Wet snow began to fall as she pushed herself off from the dead tree. Her glove was sticky with sap, and bits of pine needles were glued to the fingers. Underfoot the granite ledge was unstable. Gravel spilled from deep gashes, and hunks of failed saplings crumbled to nothing the instant they took her weight. Despite the cold, Teresa started to sweat. The pain in her back chewed inward, and although she didn't want to admit it, didn't even want to acknowledge it, her lower abdomen began contracting in rhythmic waves. No, no, no. Her baby wasn't due yet. 2 weeks more. It had to be. She needed to make it to the city, to find shelter. She'd even held back enough coins for a midwife and a room. Finding a lead through the rocks, she picked up her pace. A lone raven, its plumage dark and oily as a scorched liver, watched her in silence from the distorted upper branch of a black stone pine. Spying it, Teresa was conscious of how ridiculous she must look. Fat-bellied, wild-haired, scrambling down a mountainside in a race against a storm. Grimacing, she looked away from the bird. She didn't like how it made her feel. Contractions were coming faster now, and Teresa found that it helped if she kept on the move. Stopping made the suffering linger, gave her seconds to count and think. Mist rose from crevices, snow flew in Teresa's face, and the wind lifted the cloak from her back. Overhead the clouds mimicked her descent, following her down the mountain as if she were showing them the way. I like that sentence. Teresa walked with her gloved hand cradling her belly. The fluid between her legs had dried to a sticky film that sucked her thighs together as she moved. Heat pumped up through the arteries in her neck, flushing her cheeks and the bridge of her nose. Faster. She had to move faster. Yeah, I think I remember the commenters talking about how they really liked the writing itself and how this book, they just thought it should be more popular than I guess it is. And that's what made me try it out. So let me, so far I like the writing. It seems like nothing jumps out at me as something to criticize, at least. Let's read a little bit of chapter 1, and then I think I'll be done. Chapter 1, The Badlands. Rafe Severance set his thighs on the target and called the ice hare to him. A moment of disorientation followed, where the world dropped out of focus like a great dark stone sinking to the bottom of a lake. Then, in the shortest space that a moment could be, he perceived the animal's heart. The light sounds and odors of the Badlands slid away, leaving nothing but the weight of blood in the ice hare's chest and the hummingbird flutter of its heart. Slowly, deliberately, Rafe angled his bow away from the target. The arrow cracked the freezing air like a word spoken out loud. As its iron blade shot past the hare, the creature's head came up and it sprang for cover in a cushion of black sedge. "Take the shot again," Dre said. "You sent that wide on purpose." Rafe lowered his bow and glanced over at his older brother. Dre's face was partially shaded by his fox hood, but the firm set of his mouth was clear. Rafe paused, considered arguing, then shrugged and reset his footing on the tundra. It never felt good deceiving Dre. Fingers smoothing down the backing of his horn and sinew bow, Rafe looked over the wind-blown flats of the Badlands. Panes of ice already lay thick over melt ponds. In the flattened colt grass between Rafe's feet, hoarfrost grew as silently and insidiously as mold on second-day bread. The few trees that managed to survive in the gravelly floodplain were wind-crippled blackstone pines and prostrate hemlock. Directly ahead lay a shallow draw filled with loose rocks and scrubby bushes that looked as tough and bony as moose antlers. Rafe dipped his gaze a fraction lower to the brown lichen mat surrounding a pile of wet rocks. Even on a morning as cold as this, the lick was still running. As Rafe watched, another ice hare popped up its head, cheeks puffing, ears trembling. It held its position, listening for danger. It wanted the salt in the lick. Game animals came from leagues around to drink at the trickle of salt water that bled across the rocks in the draw. Tim said the lick welled up from an underground stream. Rafe raised his bow, slid an arrow from the quiver at his waist. In one smooth motion, he knocked the iron arrowhead against the plate and drew the bowstring back to his chest. The hare swiveled its head. Its dark eyes looked straight at Rafe. Too late. Rafe already had the creature's heart in his sights. Kissing the string, Rafe let the arrow fly. Fingers of ice mist parted, a faint hiss sounded, and the arrowhead shot straight into the hare's rib cage. If the creature made a sound, Rafe didn't hear it. Carried back by the force of the blow, it collapsed into the lick. "That's 3 to you, none to me." Dre's voice sounded flat, resigned. Rafe pretended to check his bow for hairpin cracks. "Come on, let's shoot targets. No more hares are going to show now you sent a live one into the lick." Dre reached out and touched Rafe's bow. "You could have used a smaller head on that arrow, you know. You're supposed to kill the hare, not disembowel it." Yeah, I like it. Yeah, I think that's enough. And let's go ahead and do a little recap and we'll get out of here. Smells alright. Nothing crazy. Alright, let's do a little recap and we'll be done. This time around we had Semitic Magic, Its Origins and Development by Reginald Campbell Thompson, and this looks like this was a print-on-demand copy of a 1908 publication, and this was $17 from Amazon. So we actually bought this one new and happy with that one. This sort of beat up Penguin Classics version of the Arabian Nights was $11, and you know there's no writing in it, but you don't really like to see a cover beat up like that, but oh well. So a little bit less satisfied with this one, and $4 for this paperback Cavern of Black Ice by J.V. Jones. Perfectly happy with that, and no writing, all in good condition. And then the other book that we opened with was the full color picture source book of Historic Ornament by Auguste Racinet, or Racinet, I'm not really sure. And this was just $6, and I think I'm most happy out of all of these purchases with this one as far as the pricing is concerned, because this book is just so cool. And I should have read a little bit more from the preface about this. This is the second, there is a first series that's similar to this that I may look at buying as well, but this is just a cool book to flip through. Anyway, I hope this was something you enjoyed. Maybe you learned a little bit about something that you didn't know before, or got interested in something that you weren't before. Thanks for checking out the show. If this is something you liked, please feel free to like and subscribe and all that good stuff. Until next time, happy reading.